Yes, I remembered this time.
Nice.
Um, so yesterday we talked about HTTP, and I mentioned that we sort of were doing it like the long division kind of way, the sort of math class style, typing it all, writing it all out, sort of teaching you how it actually works. But that today we'd be showing you sort of more realistic ways how you make these requests, sort of with tools that allow that facilitate not making lots of mistakes and also sort of allow you to take some shortcuts. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let me share my screen here so we can get started. Oh, I also want to mention that before I share my screen, so this class today, I was expecting to talk about 2 out of the 3 tools we're going to use to sort of make HTTP requests. Because we've generally been moving pretty fast, I think I might try to fit the 3rd one in today too. We'll see. So if we're sort of making decent progress, we'll try to get number 3 in there too. The reason why I'd like to do that is the 3rd one is probably the one I think that is the one you're gonna have the most trouble with. And I'd love to give you some time to sort of let it marinate over the weekend. Because otherwise I'm gonna hit you up on Monday and you're gonna be like, whoa, what's going on? And that's probably not so nice. So we'll see. But I kind of structured it not expecting we'd have OpenHack on, so it'd be 4 days. But had to sort of, so maybe we'll get a chance to do that either way. But yeah. Okay. Oh, that's a preview of the future here. Let me go back to what we're doing today. So today we're talking about some HTTP tools and libraries. So to kind of clarify what I mean by that, so like I said before, these are going to be some tools that are going to make the process of making HTTP easier and simpler. And I think probably everybody yesterday, to some degree, was probably thinking like, why am I typing all this stuff up by hand? We have computers, can't they do this for us? And yeah, they can. So we're going to talk about 3 tools in this module. And I'll say, at the point you all are at now, these are probably the 3 that you'll get the most value out of. The first one's called Postman, the second one's called cURL, and the third one's called Fetch. So Postman is a tool that like a graphical sort of tool, kind of like an image editor sort of, that allows you to sort of type in a form all the information you want and make an HTTP request with that information. cURL is a tool that you can use in the terminal to make HTTP requests. And there's a good reason why we're going to talk about it, but we'll get to that later today. And Fetch is sort of the one that you're going to have the most fun / trouble with. And that's making requests from JavaScript. So as I said, we're going to cover the first 2 today in this class. And we're going to try to cover Fetch today. If we don't make it happen, though, it'll end up rolling over to next Monday. Okay, so to get started, I want you all to download Postman. So I'm going to go through this interactively with you. If you go to getpostman.com/downloads, I should have made this a link in the presentation. Whatever. You can see it there. Open up a new tab. Go to that link. You're going to see something that looks kind of like this. And I will be honest, I don't 100% know, but I'm pretty sure you all have Macs with Apple chips in them, not Intel chips. I'm like 90% sure of that. So I think you want to click the Mac Apple chip one. I'm going to click the Mac Intel chip one, though. So this is going to download Postman, the application, to your system. So I'm going to click it. It's going to download a file. Once you have that downloaded, what you're going to want to do is something sort of like double click on it to unzip it here. You get a little postman.app file. Give a second here just for folks to catch up.
if the application doesn't like show .app at the end, is it like technically the same thing?
Yeah, it's the same thing. I think I have file extensions on, and you may not by default. Really, what you're going to see is that little like Postman, Superman flying icon that's orange. If you see that, it's good.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Mine is a zip.
Yeah, so double click that zip and it should open up it should decompress a zip and open up the Postman or show the Postman app.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep, Artrell, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just logged in. Which version am I downloading? The Intel chip or the Apple chip?
I'm pretty sure you want the Apple chip one. I should have checked with Max ahead of time just to make sure, but
Yeah,
I'm gonna
one. Yeah, all of us have the one with the Apple chip in it.
cool. Okay, sweet. So once you have this file here, what you're going to want to do is drag this over in your applications folder. And for me, it's going to say, do you want to replace it? For you, it should just work. But I already have Postman installed, so I'm just sort of reinstalling it here, kind of. And then once you've done that, you can go to your applications folder and go to Postman and double click it. You might see an alert that'll say something like, do you trust this application? Yeah, something like this. And you just want to click open to see that. And then eventually Postman will open up for you. Looks something kind of like this.
Do we have to create the free account?
Yeah, so I've already sort of got my thing here set up here. There should be a thing you can click that's like, don't create account, I think.
Yeah, there's a skip link towards the bottom.
Nice. Okay, that's you.
No, but do you suggest that we make an account? Is there something that like we might be saving in this, or?
I think Postman has sort of like a cloud component where you can sort of save requests you want to make to the cloud and store them there. I'd say for now, click skip. It's pretty easy, I think, to make an account later and sort of to add that account. I'll say I've never made an account, and so I don't really know what those advanced features are, and I haven't found myself missing them, but maybe I'm just missing out.
I'm good, thanks.
Also, my text is really big because I've zoomed it in so you all can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Your text will probably be a lot smaller. Well, I've got 102 requests. Weird. Anyway, so once you get this far, you see something that looks kind of like this. You should have Postman installed. Real quick, is anybody having trouble getting Postman installed? I just want to make sure sort of people are good before we keep moving forward here.
Good.
Okay, cool. I'm going to assume that folks are doing okay unless I see someone.
Artrell, are you good?
Oh, yeah.
All right, I'm at the point where it says create an account or sign in.
You should click skip at the bottom.
Oh, okay.
I signed in. Whatever.
How do
Yeah,
you
you
sign in? You created an account?
You can
Yeah.
make an account if you want. It shouldn't make a difference for what we're
I'll
doing
skip
today.
it for now.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward then.
Okay.
So also, I should mention, I noticed like a couple minutes before this presentation that my screenshots in here are a little bit out of date. This is a slightly older version of Postman. All the same stuff should apply. It's just like the interface controls are going to look a little different, but everything's sort of organized still the same and stuff like that. So just want to call that out. But you should see something kind of like this, very roughly. And there's this sort of tab bar along the top here. Just like a web browser, you can sort of create multiple tabs and sort of do things like keep track of multiple requests going on at the same time. And think of each of these sort of like a document, and that document is sort of one-to-one with a request. So you can sort of type in your method and type in all your other stuff in here and your headers and all that and click like go. I don't know why it's like scrolling like this side to side for me. I don't get it, but hopefully it's not doing that for you. But you can click sort of send and then see sort of the results of your request all in line in this web application. So up top, this top section up here, is the request. So sort of from below the tab bar to right below where it says response, this sort of section. That's where you enter all your request information. And then below, when you hit click send, you'll sort of see your response, sort of what's come back from the server. And you'll notice a lot of things. Oh, Exona, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, so mine doesn't look like that. Mine just has an overview on top of it, but it doesn't show exactly where you're looking at the.
If you click this plus button on the tab bar, you should be able to make a new page.
Clearly, I
see-
wasn't paying attention. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So all this sort of stuff in here should look kind of familiar from yesterday, like the method, request body, request headers, status code, response body, all this sort of stuff is here. The only new thing from yesterday is the URL. We haven't talked about URLs yet, but you've probably heard that term before and maybe have sort of guessed what's going on there. So, but I just want to cover that real quick officially about what a URL is.
Ryan,
So yeah,
I'm sorry, really quickly I'm sorry to interrupt you.
yep, go for it.
It says, how would you like to start? Click on new HTTP request.
Yeah, there should be a tab bar along the top, and you can click a plus button to make a new page.
Okay, only because it's opening up like an app.
Oh, click on, I already know how to use it.
Oh, whoops.
Oh, it's giving a little tutorial. Yeah, I guess I haven't gone through this
Oh, I
setup
see.
process.
I see. Okay. I'll no problem. I'll figure this out. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan and Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Cool.
Click-
And if
I clicked on end lesson.
nice.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And you should at that point see like the overview page, and you click the plus in the tab bar and make the new tab, and then you should be back where we are here. Cool. So, and also like if I'm moving too fast here, let me know. But I'm just going to keep on plugging away unless anyone tells me otherwise. So URLs. A URL is sort of a combination of a lot of the data we've used so far, kind of all put together into one field. And the reason why it's sort of done this way is because a lot of this information refers to sort of collectively like what you're requesting. So if you think about yesterday, we talked about the path. That's sort of like the subject of the sentence of your request. And the host name sort of, or like the DNS name, or sort of where the IP address, like that is also kind of like where, like what you're making the request to. So it sort of makes sense to kind of combine those together. And also at the beginning of a URL, you've got this thing called a protocol. And this is sort of defines like the protocol that you're using to communicate with. So what's cool is like, if you see a thing that starts with HTTP:// you know that, oh, this is going to accept HTTP requests. It also sort of defines like the default port. So if you see HTTP:// then you know, oh, this is on port 80.
Mm-hmm. What's URL stand for? Each letter.
Universal Resource Locator.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I have that in the outline, which I forgot to post a link to, but Mel probably will do it if he hasn't already. One other thing I'll mention while I'm here is there's these things called query parameters you can put at the end. And this is, remember yesterday how I talked about that there's 3 ways you could include data in a request? This is the third way. So the first way is headers, the second way is a body, and the third way is query parameters. And these are sort of another kind of like key value thing, kind of like the headers, where you can sort of include like data in the URL, or effectively this is part of the path. So if I wanted to make a request to students1 detail equals true, key value, foo bar, that, oops, that whole thing, or just foo b, whatever. If I wanted to make that, the path in my request would be everything in blue and everything in purple. It's kind of smushed together. Actually, while I'm here, one more thing too. So if you want to make a request on a different port, the way you do that is you specify after the domain name a colon and then a number. So let's say I want to make a request on port 5000. What this is going to say is like, yeah, it's an HTTP request, but I'm overriding that. I'm saying make this request on port 5000, not port 80. This is not super common, this sort of colon syntax. Like you'll use it occasionally. I guess like maybe that's a bit of a lie. It's not like uncommon. You'll use it from time to time, but like in general, when you're as like a user, when you're connecting to things, you're going to be connecting on a standard port like port 80. When you're using a non-standard port, it's usually because you're doing something weird, like local development or I don't know, trying to configure something locally that you already have like port 80 used for some reason, or it happens, but it's less common. So we're going to talk about query parameters a little bit later today, so don't worry if they're a little bit weird, but I just want to bring them up and sort of expose you to them just so if you see them, you kind of know what they are. Oh yeah, so this is sort of like how this decodes into that NC netcat thing we talked about yesterday. So the red part sort of turns into the port, the green part turns into the domain name, and the blue part here turns into the path. And just to make it super obvious, I've had like a query parameter here. This would be like that. Cool. Okay. So we're going to start doing some stuff with Postman. And I'm going to start off here by making that request we made yesterday to get fruit, that super simple one that returned apples, bananas, oranges, or something like that. I don't know. Sometimes I just got to come up with random stuff. And well, I guess I was into fruit that day. Okay. So looking at this sort of thing here, it's really at the end of the day, just sort of like a form. So we've got a method here and it's got all these different options, but new get, and then we're going to enter the URL. So in this case, sort of going back to the parts of the URL here, start with our protocol. So our protocol is HTTP. And then our domain name, in this case, we're just going to talk to that same server. I guess I didn't spell that out explicitly, but we're going to talk to that careersincode.ml server again for this one. Careersincode.ml. And then we need the path. So the path was /fruit. So I'm going to do that /fruit. And yeah, that was kind of all I needed to do. There were no sort of headers for that request, no sort of special body. It's a GET request. There's not going to be a body. So yeah, once I have that, I don't know why this is being all weird for me and making me scroll, but I'm going to click send. And then there we go. I get back something that looks a lot like what we did yesterday. You'll notice here that it gives me back a status. And it will actually also give you a summary info. It'll tell you this is what the status means. So you'll start to memorize some of these, but like if you get back a weird one, you can just like hover over it and it'll tell you what it is, which is kind of nice. It'll also do sort of cool things where it'll give you the time it took to make the request, like all the sort of bits of that. So like you'll see there, the DNS part of that request actually took the most time, interestingly enough. But then like TCP handshake is sort of like the part where it's sort of like figuring out where it's going through the internet and sort of setting up that connection with the remote server. Transfer start is sort of like the amount of time that it takes to send the data over the socket. And download is the amount of time it takes to send the data coming back across the socket. And then process down there at the bottom is the amount of time it took for the server to run, I believe.
Brian,
So
how did you
yeah.
get this information again?
So once I clicked send on the right here, after I entered my request, I
Yes.
hovered over time and that saw this.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yep. And
So I
there's
know,
just,
real quick,
Yeah.
I think the scroll issue might be due to like magnifying the text and stuff, because mine went weird when I made the text and everything bigger.
huh.
Okay,
Okay.
maybe not
Well,
then.
I made it a little smaller, I guess, and now it seems to be less bad. So I'll go with it. There's also this cool size thing too. Like this is all stuff where probably at the point you're at now, it's a little less important, but like when you start to do a bit more serious web development, like things around how long it takes certain requests to happen can be pretty important, and things around how much data you're transferring is kind of really important too. Yeah, so anyway, there's also like you can see sort of things like the response headers all listed out here, which is kind of nice. Cookies, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Yeah, so have folks had success making this request on their own? I guess I didn't say explicitly to do that, but give it a shot if you haven't.
Yep, it worked.
Cool. Seeing lots of thumbs up. Nice. Quite a bit
Pretty
easier than
cool.
Netcat, right? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's pretty cool to know what's happening behind the scenes now. Like I've
Yeah.
been searching for, I've always put stuff in that search bar and I just get my results without really knowing what's happening. But it's pretty cool to know.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. If anybody has any questions, let me know and I can sort of help out, but otherwise I'm gonna keep moving. Okay, sounds good. Actually, one more thing while I'm in here. So under headers, this is sort of where you can enter custom headers. But in addition, if you click this little 6 hidden thing up top here, right next to the title of the header section, you can see all these sort of headers that it includes by default in the request. And these are often kind of helpful, just sort of to like, if you're debugging things. But also, I wanted to call out, if I were to put like a body in this request, I'm gonna make it a post just so I can do that. Just put like raw and sort of type some text in here. Actually, what I'm gonna do over here, you'll actually see that it adds a, oh, well, okay, this doesn't say it, but it sort of will now add that content length header. So sort of when we were talking about yesterday, sort of how that gets auto-populated, you can kind of see how that happens in Postman if you play around.
And where do you see that here?
So if I go over to body and I enter a body, and then I go over to headers, and you click on the 8 hidden or the hidden thing up there, you can see there's a content length header that gets automatically added.
If it says 11, is that a problem or?
Like 11 hidden instead of 8 hidden?
Yes.
No, not a problem. Just means it's sending some more headers, I guess. Be curious what the different headers are, but yeah, it's probably just some different ones based on how your system's set up. Yeah, cool. Okay, here's some more requests. Let's go through these together, or maybe we can do them separately. I guess I'll start walking through them here. If you want to do them on your own, just you can kind of rush ahead and do them all before I get to them. But this first one's kind of very similar here. Making a get request. This time we're going to make a request to apples. Really keeping that fruit theme up, huh? Okay. So I'm going to make a new tab, just so I sort of have that old request around still. And so the method here is get, and the host name is cURL. And using port A, the default, and I'm making an HTTP request. I'm going to put that HTTP : on the front. And then path of /apples. So path goes to the end of the URL. So I'm going to put my path there. Cool. And this one, again, doesn't really need anything special. Yeah, apples. Okay, cool. 200, okay, that's good. Got back a bunch of response headers here. Also very good. Okay. Next one here. So my method this time is post. So we're going to do something a little different here. So change this to post. And my host name, again, cURL. And port A to default. So, and I'm making an HTTP request. So HTTP : after this whole dance. Okay. Path echo this time. Path echo. Path goes to the end of the URL. And then body of hello. So I'm going to go over to body here, and I'm going to, there's a bunch of different options you can pick here for body, just to quickly kind of go through them. These are all sort of different sort of schemes you can use to send data in the body. These all end up sort of encoding into plain text, but sort of there's different ways you can sort of format the text in there. We're going to talk about some more of those later on in later next week. But the one you're pretty much going to want right now is always raw. You just want to send raw sort of text in your body. And what did it say? It said hello. Okay, hello. Something like that. Okay, cool. I'm gonna click send. Got back a 200 okay, that's a good sign. And then my body and my response body, I also got back hello. So this endpoint takes whatever you send it in the request and gives you back the same thing in the response. I'm just telling you that because I wrote it and I know what it does, but like sort of understanding that you probably can make the correlation there. Yeah. Cool.
All under the pretty tab,
Say that again.
right? We're under the pretty tab.
Yep. Yeah, down below. But this doesn't really matter. You can, I think, be on any of these and it'll sort of give you the same thing. I guess not visualize, but
No, I'm just trying to figure out how you got to where you are. Like I've got the raw selected and the body part. Now I'm trying to enter something in for the body, but it won't let me delete the HTML header information that's there.
so just to be clear on the tab bar right here, you have body selected, right? Okay. And then when you sort of here, do you have raw selected?
I do.
Okay. And then in this text box, you're saying you sort of can't change what's in the text box.
Oh, no, I was wrong. I did not have raw selected. I thought I had.
Ah,
Okay, thank you.
I'll say one complaint I will just bring up of Postman's interface is sometimes it's not clear when certain controls are disabled or enabled. Their sort of disabled state isn't so great. So if you think a control looks disabled, you might want to click it and see if it focuses, and then you'll know it isn't. I've run into that in the past.
I'm still not getting the right response. It's a 404.
Well, let's have you share your screen. Let's take a look.
Yes, please. So is this
Take a look at your method.
method. Oh, we had to change it.
Yep, it needs to be post.
Okay. I missed that part.
And I bet if you click send, it'll work now.
Oh, I have to click send.
Cool.
Okay. All right. I'm slow. So
No problem. You're
thank
doing
you.
fine.
What does echo do?
What do you mean, what does it do?
Like, I'm assuming it's a command. Does it?
Yeah, so I
What
guess
do?
it's sort of a term in it's a term and slash a command. I guess where it comes from is there's a command in the terminal called echo. And if you give echo any sort of text, it prints it back out to you again. And seems like you might be wondering, like, why is this useful? Like, why do you need to get text printed back out to you again? But where it's often helpful is sort of as like a pass through to other programs. And without knowing more about sort of how terminals work, this isn't going to make much sense to you. But a great example is if I want to take some data and write it to a file in the terminal, I can sort of echo that data, and then I can sort of redirect it into a file and sort of write it to a file. And an easy way to do that is sort of to echo it and then use a special functionality to sort of take the output of that command and put it into a file. I know that's probably not all that helpful, but if Max mentioned that you folks hadn't done too much with terminals yet, I would love to talk more about that, maybe at OpenHack or at the office hours or something where I have a bit more time to go into it. It's a particular passion of mine. And I could sort of go off the deep end for anyone who wants to indulge me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Cool. Okay, we're gonna move on to curl real quick. We're gonna come back to Postman a little bit later, but I just want to sort of get all the tools set up and ready to go here. So curl is another way to make requests, and curl is a little bit different. It's a command line tool. So you might have a little bit more trouble with it, given you're not as familiar with the command line. But there's a big reason why I'm going to be showing you this. And I guess let's sort of go through it before I talk about that reason. So curl, just like netcat, has a bunch of these sort of like switches or these flags. Start with dash. And the best way to look at this sort of thing is to look. So the first thing curl is sort of the command you're running, and then everything after that is sort of parameters passed to curl. And the best way to look at it is sort of to look at the first parameter dash something. And then the second thing after that is sort of the like argument that dash something takes. So these sort of dash letter things aren't maybe super obvious on first glance, but hopefully with time will become a bit more obvious. So dash X in curl means method, dash uppercase H means header, and dash D means body. So if I'm looking at this request here, what this request means is dash X post, so make a post request, dash uppercase H, and then this header here. So include this header in the request. So this is a request header, I should say, not just a header. And then dash D optional request body. So this is, I'm including this body in the request. And then the URL at the very end. So I also want to mention that all these parameters here are optional.
I really
that's
hope that
fine.
lowercase b was used for something else. Because it seems like such a better choice for the body than lowercase d.
So it's D for data. That's where it comes from.
Got it. Okay,
and
that makes sense.
the reason why it's so okay, let me show you something else. We got some time today to noodle around a little bit. Oh, wrong one. I thought I had a terminal open here. This one? Yeah, this one. So there's a command in the terminal that I'll show you all called man. And it's a cool one to know about. So man takes only one parameter, and it's a command. And what man will do is it'll print what's called the manual page for that command. And if you know, like you sort of get an old school like appliance or something, maybe this doesn't happen anymore, but you get like a paper manual in the box, you can sort of like open it up and read it and be like, this is how the thing works. And all these sort of commands are pretty old school, and like there are manuals for them, sort of like instructions on how to use the command. So if I type like man, for example, like curl, hit enter, it'll actually give me this thing called the curl manual. And this is like a document I can sort of go through and read, and it'll sort of tell me how to use curl and all the sort of parameters I can specify, like all the options and sort of all the permutations and what each one does, and like the combinations of them you can use together and what you can't use together. This is like a long, complex document that's sort of been iterated on for like probably tens of years. So it's like not a light read. But what's really nice about it is if you're really curious, like how do I do something with a command, you can just look through it and it'll probably tell you. A couple things you'll probably notice though is this thing's going to open up and look like this, and you're not going to be able to scroll. Or actually, maybe you will be able to scroll. Huh, how about that? Okay, maybe that works now. But in general, you're in this thing right now, this application called a pager. And this is like sort of an old school kind of terminal-y thing, but it's kind of an important concept. And a pager is a program that allows you to sort of go through a lot of output. So let's say you've got like a really long amount of output, and you sort of want to like scroll through it and like go back to the top and sort of go down a little bit and like scan around, maybe search for things. The pager will sort of let you do that. So the pager by default used on your system is a thing called less. That's not all that important, but it has a bunch of sort of keyboard shortcuts and ways you can interact with it. Because you can sort of scroll and that seems to work, like just using your trackpad, like that's probably going to be fine. The one shortcut I do want to tell you about though is if you type slash and start typing, like if I did slash and type dash uppercase X and hit enter, it'll sort of give me every occurrence of dash uppercase X in there. And if you hit N, it'll sort of go to the next one. So in this case, I typed slash uppercase X and hit enter, and then hit N for one more time, and then sort of, there we go. I see, okay, specifies a custom request method to use when communicating with the HTTP server. So that's what dash uppercase X does. It looks like you can also use dash dash request too. That's another option. It'll sort of do the same thing. And it'll also tell you things like, normally you don't need this option. It'll sort of do a bunch of like, it'll sort of infer a bunch of stuff, like depending on what you want to do. It also probably will say down here. No, I guess it won't say, but the default method is get. So if you don't include a dash uppercase X, it's just going to be like, okay, I'm making a get request. Let's do that for dash uppercase H too while we're here. Dash uppercase H. There we go. Okay, so looks like you can also do dash dash header if you want. It's another option here, and it'll sort of tell you how to format it. So I'm not expecting you all to sort of pick this up right off the bat, but I just want you to know that these things called man pages or manual pages exist. And if you're curious about how a command works, it's a great sort of reference. Also, if you look up online, like curl man page, let's do that. They're actually all published online too. So this might be an easier way to do it, but anyway.
Well, no, I just want to say I appreciate you showing that. I think it's very useful. I just want to say, like, the way that we learn programming, I remember you saying you're a self-taught programmer. I think like in this boot camp style of programming, like a lot of times like terms get thrown at us, and like not even by any fault of the teachers, it's just by the pace of it. Like if someone's throwing at us, and when you talk about like you put this header in for that, and you put this header in for that, like sometimes it could be a little hard to think like how do you know that though? Like how do you know to do that? So things like where to find documentation, like where to look things up ourselves, you know, is super helpful. I think like the class would agree. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Let's try to make some curl requests. Oh, this is also kind of what it'll look like here when you make a curl request. So it will, by default, it won't actually print all this stuff out for you. There's another flag I guess I used here that I didn't specify, -v. If you pass -v, it'll run in what's called verbose mode. This is a standard sort of concept in a lot of terminal applications, where when you run in verbose mode, it'll sort of print out a lot more information. So like, let's say you run a command and you're not sure what it's doing, and you're like, this isn't doing the thing I want. You can run it in verbose mode, and it'll sort of tell you what's happening. It'll be like, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And you can sort of read through the logs and be like, oh, wait a second, that's not doing what I think it should do. So that's often a helpful sort of entry point to sort of debug an application in the terminal. Actually, okay, I guess I've got a few more slides here before we get to writing some stuff with curl. But the reason why I'm talking about curl, you might be like, okay, whatever. I mean, I know Postman, why do I need to use curl? This is like a command line application. This isn't probably as fast or as easy. The big important thing to know about curl is that it's kind of the way that web developers often will communicate with each other when they want to send each other requests. So let's say I'm running a request on my system and it's not working. And there's someone else who's writing a web server. And I want to like tell them, I want to say, hey, here's the request I'm making. Like, I want you to sort of, so you can reproduce it on your end and try it out. I could say to them, okay, I'm making a request with a method of get and like with this body and to these URL and these headers, and like that would work, but it's very likely you'll sort of miss a detail or something. Like when you transmit that, you maybe want to include like the space at the end of the body you're sending by accident that's actually causing the issue or something like that. So what's cool about curl is a lot of different applications will allow you to actually generate this sort of curl command line like thing. And it's almost like a protocol for describing an HTTP request like between humans. It's kind of a weird like meta thing, but it's very helpful. And when you're sort of working at a job as a software developer, you're going to run into this quite often, where someone will be like, hey, I had this problem. Here's a curl to reproduce it. And that could just like, you can take that curl and run it in the command line, or you can like import it into Postman. So I want to show you kind of how this works, because I think this is in practice how you're probably going to use curl more than just running things in the command line. So I'm going to take this curl command here. I'm going to copy this to my clipboard. Now, I got to remember how to do this. It's been a second since I did this, and I didn't review it this morning. There's a way I can import this. Oh gosh, I might have to look it up online. How embarrassing would that be? Yeah, I might have to look it up online.
Google is my best friend. So I
Yeah.
don't know anybody
No,
else, but
it's
Google helps me every day.
Oh, yeah.
it's not that big of a deal. I just should kind of seem like I'm prepared coming into these classes, and maybe I wasn't with this one so much. How to import curl into Postman.
It's okay that you're human. I'll forgive.
No problem. Okay, and no, that's not what I want. Okay, import curl into Postman. Curl and Postman work wonderfully together. I like the sound of that. Yeah, I know I can export. Oh, here we go. No, that's not what I want. Okay, let's just mess around here for a second. Import. Yeah, this is what I'm looking for. Nice. Okay. So you go to File, Import. You go Raw Text, and you paste a curl in there. You go Continue. It'll parse that curl and be like, oh, I understand what this is. And you can go Import, and there we go. It's got the method, it's got that, it's got the body in there. I guess it did the body kind of a weird way, but whatever. So the idea is now I can click Send and sort of reproduce that request. In addition, I can
Can you-
actually, oh yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead.
show us again really quick how you did it. So you
Yeah.
copied the code from the slides, and what did you do?
Yep. So I copied this from the slide, and then I went over to File, and then Import. It looks like you can also hit Command O to open it up, but do that. And I can go to Raw Text in the Import pop-up, paste my curl in there, and then click Continue and click Import. Now, I can actually go the other way too. So if I have a request, an existing request I made, there's a way I can export it, which I'm also, oh, save response. This post just had it in here, how to do it. Code snippet generator. That's what I want. That thing. Yeah. Ah, here. Wait. Oh, the code icon on the right panel. That's why, because my right panel's hidden. Yeah, here we go. And then there we go. We got our curl. You'll notice that like their exact permutations of what they did is a little bit different. Like I just gave you the flags that I sort of use that I'm familiar with, but like they're gonna probably use some different ones. And like at the end of the day, it's not all that important that you can look at this exactly and be like, I know exactly what each of these parameters means and how they interact and how they work. But what's important is that I can take this, I can send this to somebody, and then they can import it back and sort of get it back into Postman or whatever thing they want. Yeah, and there we go. Cool. So that being said, we're going to do a little bit of curl just because I want you to be exposed to it. But like that's really where I think the value you're going to run into with curl is.
Okay, could you review a tool for making requests in the command line? Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna do a request with curl here just to sort of go through it, so that you can actually see sort of its primary use, because I think that'll also kind of make it make more sense.
Okay.
Because I thought we were. Well, let me just go back to the ones we were doing before. We'll do the same ones. Okay, so let's make these with curl. Oh, I should also mention if you have the man page open and you want to close it, if you hit Q, it'll close it. It's a general thing with pagers. Excuse me. Cool. Okay. So if we're going to make a curl request, we got to start it with curl, cURL space. Okay. So method of get, hostname, path. Those are the three things we have. I'm going to jump back over to our documentation here. And go. And we're going to do this here. Okay, so it was a method of get. So method dash uppercase X. So dash uppercase X, GET, all uppercase. Okay, space. So here I'm telling, okay, dash X, okay, the next thing coming should be a method. Now, the next thing we had was the host name and the path. Now, I don't have sort of parameters for these. And the reason why I don't is curl just expects to, by default, at the very end of what you give it, a URL. And there's no sort of flag for it because the URL is a required piece. So you can't make a request without one with curl. I guess you can't really do that with Postman either, or really anything. So the only sort of argument we have to pass that's one of these named ones is the method. We've got get, and that's it. So our host name was careersencode.ml. Also, if you want me to make my terminal text bigger, let me know, but I'm assuming you can see it okay. Our path was, I think, /apples. And then our protocol was HTTP. What's that? Jump back over here to the list of requests. Okay. So apples, careersencode.ml, port 80, we're making HTTP requests, so that makes sense. So the protocol is HTTP. No sort of custom port needed because it's port 80. -XX get says the method's get. Cool. So if we hit enter, apples. There we go. It made the request. How cool. Artrell, you've got your hand raised.
I do. I got a stupid question.
There are no stupid questions. Go for it.
Appreciate that. Are we doing this in curl or in terminal?
You're running this command in the terminal. I should clarify that netcat yesterday, when you ran that command ran and sort of like paused, and you could sort of type things as it was running, and then you hit Control-C when you're done, and it would sort of go back to the terminal again. Curl doesn't work that way. Curl will run, and it will terminate quite quickly. Sort of it'll like run and then return and be done, give you back your prompt when you're done. So it's not a command where sort of you can like run things in curl directly, kind of like we could with netcat yesterday. It's just sort of going to be like run and then be done and give you back your prompt. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, but I think I'm in the wrong place in terminal. I'm trying to get to where you are to do those functions.
Okay, maybe it would be helpful if you share your screen then.
All right. Spare me 1 second. All right.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like you're in roughly the right spot here. But if you type curl on your terminal and then type space, -uppercase get. And then space HTTP colon. Oh, yeah, it goes all on one line. No sort of returns involved in this. So this is sort of just like that NC command we ran yesterday, where you want everything on one line before you hit enter to actually invoke the command. HTTP ://careersencode.ml.
Does HTTP have to be capitalized?
Nope, all lowercase for HTTP. I think in practice it actually doesn't matter, but typically it's lowercase.
Okay.
It's a : //.
And I know that. I'm just feeling pressured right now, and that's my problem.
No problem.
Okay. And what's next?
Careersencode.ml. /apples. Do that one. And if you hit enter, there we go.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Schneider, you've also got your hand raised.
Yeah. I didn't put the space. Actually, I accidentally put a space after the HTTP and then queries code, and I got using bad or legal format or using URL. Well, what's happening there?
Yeah, so I'm gonna guess here because I don't know all of the semantics of curl, but I'm pretty sure that if you specify 2 words at the end, so like a space separated thing like that, curl's going to actually try to make a request to 2 different things. And it's going to try to make a request to the URL that is purely http://, and that's not really a valid URL. And it's going to try to make a request to careersandcode.ml/apples. And that technically isn't a valid URL, but I think curl's smart enough to be like, I'm going to just stick an HTTP on there and sort of assume it. So I think the first request it makes will fail, and the second one might succeed, but it's not really the intended way to do it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Cool. Okay. I'm also going to show that -v parameter here too, just to sort of give you the example, just because it's kind of another one of the helpful little curl parameters. So if you stick a -v on the end of your command, lowercase v, and hit enter, you'll actually see a lot of interesting output. And you'll see something that looked a lot kind of like what you typed yesterday. Get, let's include a couple headers along the way. And then HTTP 1.1, 200 OK, and all your response headers, and then your response body. This is sort of a helpful debugging thing with curl. Again, probably not all that important, but it's almost like if I run a curl and it doesn't work immediately, like this is almost the thing I do immediately following it. I'll stick a -v on the end just to make sure I'm understanding the everything's being sent as I expect. So this is where understanding the protocol behind the scenes is helpful, because you can look at this and like be like, oh, actually this header is wrong, or this body is wrong. Yeah. Okay. We're going to do a bit more with both curl and Postman in a second with some of the exercises, and as I suspected that we're going to go into fetch probably also today. So 2 tools, which one should I use? And you can really use whatever you want. Like today, we're going to sort of force you to use both, but like beyond today, if you just decide like, I actually really like curl because I'm a command line person, and I'd be like, nice choice, but that's kind of a rare choice, I think. People tend to be not a big fan of that stuff as much. Like you can use curl, or you can use Postman. Both me, Max, and Mel, and I think every other TA and instructor should be familiar with both. So like they'll be able to help you out. But yeah, you can use kind of whatever you want after today. So we are going to make some requests. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to work on these sort of up until 7. And then at 7, we'll take our break, and then we'll come back and we'll at least start talking about fetch.
Okay, so I have a question I probably should have asked a few days ago.
Yeah.
Why do we make requests?
Great question. I'm kind of surprised no one's asked that yet. So the big reason why is right now you've been building applications that sort of deal with data all locally on your computer. And you can do a lot with that. But a lot of the power of computing comes from the internet. And you haven't really been able to take advantage of the internet yet. And you all are sort of studying to become web developers after all, and the web is the internet. So this is sort of the first part of Careers in Code where we're starting to talk about how you can make applications that can take advantage of the internet. So like let's talk about a bit more concrete examples though about why, like what you could do with this. So first thing, let's say you've got a list of a set of data out on a server somewhere, sort of that's stored by somebody. Like an example of maybe what that could be, a thing we're going to be doing later this class. We're going to be talking to the New York Times. The New York Times manages a list of books. It's like the popular books that they sort of advertise, like their bestsellers list or whatever it is. And let's say you're building an application and you want to get like a bunch of popular books and show it to users. You can't really do that yourself. I mean, I guess you could like build out a whole thing where like you could rate books and you could sort of like show that to people, and you could do that all locally, but it's probably a better use of your time to use somebody else's data, and their data is going to be better anyway. So you can't like generate that data locally very effectively. You need to get that from somewhere. And it just, oh yeah, go ahead.
You can just take it.
Yeah, I mean, and the way that by which you take that data is you make a request to them and you say, I'd like this data. And they'll give you back that data in the response. This is sort of like the standardized way that on the web things tend to communicate, and the way you sort of would ask for data.
What if it said no?
It could give you back a 400 or a 500 and say no. And then you're just like out of luck and you're like, oh, well, okay, maybe I can try again. Or maybe it'll tell you why it said no and you can retry your request.
Another way to think about it, Jennifer, might be the exercises we did before where we used like a database, which were like those arrays inside arrays, and we were making like for loops and stuff to pull that stuff out. Like that would be a server. So like if you're making a request on the internet, you'd be requesting the stuff that's like in that database, if that helps.
Okay.
Another thing that, well, I guess maybe you folks have seen you can do this, but like generally when you refresh the web page, all the sort of JavaScript that's running on that page, all the sort of data that's you sort of dealing with, that all gets lost. And yeah, there's some stuff like local storage where you can sort of hack around that I think you've been exposed to, but generally it gets lost. And if you store all that stuff on a server, that server doesn't get terminated. It sort of can live on for a long time. So it's also a way where you can keep track of data between different web browser sessions and across different systems. So like you log into a web page and you have access to data like, I don't know, maybe like you have an Amazon account and you're making purchases and you want to see like a list of the orders you've made. That's not stored on your web browser. That's stored on a server somewhere. And the web browser is making a request to the server to get that information.
Okay.
So it's going to come up a lot. And generally in modern web development, I'd say like anything written after like mid to late 2000s, making requests after the page is loaded to get data is like a very key part of the whole system working properly.
Okay.
It was probably way more than you wanted to hear, but I hope it answered your question.
It did. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool.
So is that the basis of API, is literally making requests and then
Yeah.
receiving those requests?
Yeah, you're picking up what I'm laying down here. Exactly. So there are lots of different types of APIs, and actually our last day of the class, we're going to be talking about some sort of conventions that people often use. But there's sort of a thing where the web was built originally as like a way that websites could communicate with servers, or web that web browsers could communicate with servers to get data. So there was sort of like a get, and there was a post method, and the post was sort of like the way that web browsers locally sent data up to the server. So like back in the day, before JavaScript even existed, the way that things worked was like your web browser would make a request to the server and get back a response that contains some HTML with some data in it. And you'd sort of show that to the user. And inside of that HTML, you'd have a form tag. And that form tag would have a method attribute that would sort of say the method you wanted to send, which is largely post. You can do it with get and it'll send it with query parameters, but it's largely post. And then it will have, I believe, an action attribute that's sort of like a path you want to send that data to. And the form would then have like form fields that were like input tags and would each have a name attribute in that form field. And that would sort of then, when you click the submit button in the form, it would make a post request to the URL specified in the action attribute on the form. So it would like make a request to that URL, and then the server could then do whatever it wants with that. And then when the server responds, the response that the server sends back to that post is then rendered as sort of the new contents of the page. So like this, of course, is kind of limiting, but this is like let's say, late 90s, early 2000s, maybe very beginning of 2000s. Like this is sort of how everything kind of worked. And you can't really have like dynamic interactions on your page. You're sort of got like, you have like static document sort of things. You don't really have like interactive web applications. But what's cool is like you can still do a lot with that. So I forgot even what the question was, but hopefully that answered it.
No, it did. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I guess we're going to keep moving forward here. These exercises are going to look very familiar. And it's because they're the same ones from yesterday. It's just we're going to do it with some different tools this time. So I think I'm just going to sort of roll through these one by one like we did yesterday. And yeah, we'll see how these go. Hopefully we can get all these done before 7. So my goal would be that you make this request both with Postman and with cURL. If you only have time for one, though, go with Postman, because that's probably the one you're going to use more often. So give this get fruit request a try, and these are all to curiousinCode.ml on port 80, just like yesterday. So let me know if you have any questions, but I'll give you some time to give it a shot.
And we're making these requests through Postman, not the terminal.
Make them through both if you can. So make it with Postman, and then when you're done, make it through cURL and terminal.
Gotcha.
Do we do this with headers or body?
I don't have any of those specified, so you shouldn't need to specify either when you make your request.
Oh, okay, they would be. All right.
Yep. Yeah, if I'm not specifying something, just assume it's not important. You don't need to include it.
So how do I just select it so it's not on something? Params.
So if you don't enter headers or body, it should be just empty by default. And if you look at the headers list here, there's not any entries in here. There's no keys or values. They call them header names keys in here. So this is just, there's no headers we're specifying here. And this is like, if you have none selected, not specifying a body. Artrell.
I can get it to work in Postman, but in terminal, I'm having an issue.
What do you see in the terminal?
So I first did it with the -x get, curiousinCode.ml fruit. Then it says ZSH command not found -x. So I scrapped it and I'll try it again.
So did you put curl at the beginning of your command?
I did not put in the curl.
That's really important. Make sure you do that. I bet if you do that, it'll work.
All right, I'll give that a shot.
Cool.
Oh, is this slide 113?
This is 121. It might be the same as 113 though. No, it's 121. Cool. Give me a thumbs up Slack reaction just once you're done here, just so I know we're good. I've seen a few, but sweet. Lots of thumbs up. That's great. Okay. I'm going to go through this here. So this is a lot like what we just did. Get code.ml/fruit. So protocol, domain name, path, no headers, no body. Click send. There we go. We got back at 200, so everything went okay. Apples, oranges, bananas, same thing we saw yesterday. Yeah, we're good.
We don't have to put in 80.
You don't have to. If you do, though, it won't break. It's just sort of like providing redundant information. It's not required, but yeah. Let's do it with curl now. Oops, it's not my terminal. That's my terminal. Okay, so with curl, we've got a method of get, that's dash uppercase X, a path of /fruit, got the host name of careers in code.ml, and then the protocol of HTTP, so that's our URL. We don't have any headers. We don't have a body. I should have put body none there too, but I guess it's sort of assumed with the get request.
Ryan, you're missing an S in careers.
I am. Actually, let me run this as it is, and I'll show you what happens.
Okay.
So it's going to say cannot resolve host career in code.ml. And this means it tried to do a DNS lookup on this and get the IP address this maps to, and it couldn't find that. And it's because there's no career in code.ml registered. Like no one has that domain. So like that's what's cool is like the error messages make a certain sort of sense to them if you sort of study them. And also, if you like look this up, could not resolve host, it's going to say DNS problem, like the first thing you see online. So, but good catch. And if I do this now, apples, oranges, bananas, there we go. Very nice. Cool. Any questions?
Yeah, why do we curl in the terminal but not in Postman? Or am I missing something here?
Curl is a command that you can run in the terminal. Postman is sort of its own application. So you can't really run curl in Postman because Postman's like its own thing. And
Okay.
curl's like its own thing.
All right, simple explanation. Thank you.
Yep.
So in Postman, I've got get http careersencode.ml:80/fruit, and it tells me it could not send the request.
Can you post the command you typed in chat?
Is it a spacing issue with where I put the colon?
Yeah, you don't want to put a space before your colon. You just want to put it all straight out.
Okay. Let's see.
So if I included the port here, it would be like this.
Where are you?
Also just paste that in there too. So the next one, if you haven't moved on already, folks want to get started on that. Should look very familiar from yesterday. Notice you don't specify content length header today. Don't have to count your characters. We're living a life of luxury here, people. give me some thumbs up in once you've had success, hopefully. Cool.
I'm sorry, I forgot. What was the process of adding the body in so you don't just like send it off or like execute it rather?
You want to use a -d parameter, but is what you're running into the, well, I guess what,
I'm getting the method and the path, but yeah, I'm not able to put in the body. I forgot how to do that.
-d. The other thing you might run into though, and I'm curious if folks who had success with this ran into it, is you've got spaces in your body. And that sometimes can have some problems. But it's folks who
Yeah,
had success. Oh yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
treat it, you gotta enclose it in the like a string. So you gotta close it in the
Yep.
commas.
Quotes.
I use single ones. I don't know if it's interchangeable like JavaScript and stuff is with the double and the single. Your example use single, so I use single in that word.
Oh yeah, I used them in my example. That's a good point. So I guess if you picked up on the details, you might have gotten it. But yeah, there actually is a difference, and we'll talk about it in a second here.
And Brandon, if you go a couple slides up, like there's an example of a request, a curl request with a body. So if you go a couple slides up, you'll see what it looks like.
All right, thanks, man.
Cool. Let's give Lisa's a shot with Postman, because I think that's probably one folks had success with here. Okay, so to make a post request, probably starting to get the hang of this here. Creators in code.ml/text processing frequencies. I'm gonna go over to body, go to raw, and type the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Click send. Same thing from yesterday. Get our frequencies. Status of 200 okay. So things worked out well. Cool. Hopefully that was pretty straightforward. And with curl, so curl the method -x post path text processing frequencies. Protocol and domain name stay the same. Then our body with -d, I'm going to put it in single quotes as I mentioned. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Get this back. Cool. So any questions before I continue? I'm going to talk about the quotes, but I think otherwise that's all I was going to say.
Ryan, how do you get your terminal to completely like erase? Like,
Yeah.
mine keeps saying last login. I guess I want, how?
Yeah, you want to sort of clear it to like clear your brain.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, I totally know what you're talking about. So there's two ways to do it. The way that most people know and the way most people are taught is there's a command in the terminal called clear.
Okay.
If you type that and hit enter, it'll clear the screen.
Oh.
So that's one option.
Hmm.
Now, there's another way that's a fancy way, and it's what I have been doing. So if you press Control L, not Command L, Control L on your Mac,
Mhm.
it'll clear.
Now
I
it's-
like that because it's
yeah,
really fast.
Yes, it still says Karen Ritchie at Karen's MacBook Air.
Yeah, it'll still have your prompt up there, and that won't go away because that's sort of like the
I
thing in front
see.
of where you're typing.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, that's the equivalent of my tilde dollar
Okay.
theta tilde thing. Yeah, that thing.
Got it.
Cool.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. So what's up with the sort of single quotes and double quote situation? They are sort of interchangeable. There is one minor detail. This is, I don't know. I'm not kind of on the fence with even telling you because it's like really kind of technical. But like in the terminal, you can define variables. Now, as sort of if you get deeper into it, you'll start to realize that actually the command you're typing in the terminal, it's actually kind of a programming language. There's a lot of programming features in it. Things like variables, things like loops, things like functions, things that probably sort of seem familiar.
Is there interpolation?
Yes, you're headed in the right direction here. So
Okay.
the double quote acts a little bit like the backtick in JavaScript, and the single quote is like the double or single in JavaScript. So if I make a variable, the way you do that is like with this keyword called export. I'm gonna call it foo, and I'm gonna make it equal to bar. What I can do is, remember I mentioned the echo command where I can print things out. So I did like echo hello world. It'll print out hello world. Well, let's do echo quotes hello world. If I want to stick that variable foo in that string, I can do $foo. And if I have double quotes, it'll go hello bar. If I do single quotes, it'll go hello foo. So that's kind of the difference. The reason why I use single quotes with curl in particular is you're going to run into circumstances where you want to make requests with things in your body that normally the shell would like want to do things with, like sort of special sequences like that $sign. Imagine you wanted to make the request hello $foo, that literal thing in the body of your request, and you do it in double quotes. It's sort of a little bit misleading. Like you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, I think it's making this request, but then what it's actually sending is something different because the shell's interpreting it. So in general, that's why for curl I use single quotes, because it has a little bit less surprising behavior in certain edge cases.
Got you.
Cool. Lockbox one again, if you haven't done that already, give it a shot. Get a chance to write a header with curl. Get to try that out. Okay, I think I'm going to start working through this one here unless anyone wants me to hold off a little longer. So get path, this part should probably be kind of repetitive at this point. Careers in code.ml/lockbox, lockbox, helps if you can spell sometimes. Then headers, so I'm going to go down here into Postman. I'm going to go to this header section here. Now, I want to call this out because this params looks a lot like the headers section. It's very subtly different. What params does is this gives you a way you can enter query parameters. So I can go like foo bar like that and see it puts the thing up there. So that's like a way you can enter them. But I don't know. It's kind of a little frustrating that they have this here over headers because I think you probably end up using headers more often, but whatever. And then, so under header, I'm going to put my custom header here, authorization. I'm going to set it equal to super secret. Now, another thing I want to call out, there's this authorization section here, this tab. You don't want that. This is sort of a more advanced thing. This is a thing that we're going to touch on later on in this module. This sort of authorization is a whole thing around like how you can sort of control who has access to certain endpoints or certain requests you can make to a server. And for now, we're sort of have a very sort of basic scheme we're using here. And this authorization feature built into Postman allows you to sort of use some more advanced ones. Okay, so I'm going to click send here. Go down here. Oh, what just happened to my Postman thing? It did something. Oh, okay. Guess. Cool. Too many Zoom windows. Okay. Could not send request. Ooh, what's going on? Oh, that's why. There we go. You've unlocked the box. Same thing we got yesterday. Let's change this header to be something else. Invalid password. Click send. Did not provide the right password. And 401 unauthorized this time. So there we go. Okay, let's do it with curl now. So curl -x get http:// careersincode.ml/lockbox. And the new part this time is we need a -uppercase H for a header. This is sort of back in the slide before that I referred to back a few times now. And the way you structure this is sort of the header : the value, just like we did yesterday when we were using netcat. So authorization : super secret. There we go. That worked. And then invalid password. That worked too. Does that make sense? Or anything you want me to review there?
Yeah, I just don't know why the Postman didn't work.
What didn't work about it within Postman for you? What did you see when you made the request?
Maybe, okay, maybe it's because I didn't put get in there. Yep, it was my get versus post.
Ah, yeah.
Just like I did it right.
So normally, I don't think my server is smart enough to do this, but there's actually a 405 code that is an invalid method code that you sometimes will get back. And in hindsight, it might have been nice for me to implement that to give you folks a hint and to get a chance to see what that looks like. But if you get that back, you sort of know, oh, that's probably the wrong method. I should use a different method. Exona.
So I did mine on the terminal and it shows up like this if you don't mind me sharing.
Yep, go for it. Ooh. Oh, you see how it says quote before what you're typing?
Oh, I didn't close the lockbox.
Well, you sort of, so hit Control-C. And then take the command you typed up there and copy it and paste it and run it, and I bet it'll work. I'll explain what the quote thing is in a second, but I just want you to have a successful thing here before we do that.
And just press enter?
Yep, just press enter.
Okay.
So type in your terminal what I'm about to say. Type echo space and then a single quote, and that's it. And then hit enter. See, it says quote there. This will happen if you don't close your quotes. And now if you type just type some whatever you want and hit enter again. So type a couple lines. Yeah, and hit enter and maybe type one more line. And then type another single quote. And then hit enter. So that's the way you can sort of like a multi-line quote or multi-line string.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think you did is you ran your curl, but you forgot to close your quote around your -h header. And then you hit enter and it didn't work because you didn't close your quote. and it like you started typing more stuff, but you were still in that string, like it hadn't like ran your command the first time. So to get out of that, you had to hit Control C to get back to your prompt. So it said like Exona at Exona's MacBook Air there. And then once you were there, then you could run curl again and actually run your command.
Okay, so next time I should just add another quote at the end.
Yeah, make sure your quotes are, you've got an opening and a closing quote. The other
So
thing, oh yeah, go ahead.
I thought I did, like, this is my opening quote, this is my closing, but
Yeah,
it should have been after the
Scroll-
live box.
scroll up a little bit. Keep going up a little more.
Oh,
Go down. Oh, sorry. A little more further down. Yeah, right there.
so right here.
Yeah, so you ran that command, and
Mhm.
notice how from that point on your prompt says quote instead of
Yeah.
like your thing. So in general, I guess a tip I'd say for everybody is like make sure when you run a command in the terminal, the thing in front of your cursor, your prompt, is what you expect it to be. If it's not, you're probably in kind of a weird mode. And if you're in a weird mode, hit Control C, it'll probably bring you out of that mode.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's just kind of a weird thing on how the terminal works. But
It's okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Hey, Ryan,
Yeah.
I have a question. Well, I should say I have an issue getting the lockbox to work in Postman. I got it to work in curl. Here's the issue I'm having is, and I think I might be doing something wrong, is like, so when I go to add the headers, right? So I put in authorization for the key
Mhm.
With a capital A, and I put in the value as super secret, right? And when I send it, it's a get, right? I can see in the URL where it's added it as parameters, like after the question mark, I can see them. But it says that it's a, you have entered the incorrect password or whatever the language of that is. All right.
Yeah.
So, but not only that, when I look at like, so the amount of headers updates to 11, like after I send it. And when I look through those 11 headers, I don't see the authorization header that I made.
Yeah.
Is that like something I'm doing wrong? Or
I'm gonna guess that you have the param section selected and not the headers section selected. So I think what you did is you added a query string parameter called authorization.
all right, that's what I did.
Cool. Yeah, I bet if you put that in headers, it'll work for you.
Yeah, the key value is just so.
Yeah, it like
Right,
looks
yeah.
exactly the same. It's like a really poor UI choice, I think. And I'll say, like, every time I've taught this, at least a few people make that mistake. So it's
That makes
totally
it feel a
cool.
little better. I think.
Yeah. Okay, nice. So I think I'm gonna maybe take our break now. We've got one more that we can sort of go through if you want, but it's sort of again what we did yesterday. Feel free to go through it on your own, but I think it's sort of the same sort of thing again. It's just sort of a post request with the body. So give it a try if you want. But I think I'm going to take our break now just because I want to have a bit of time to do fetch after the break. And fetch is going to be a little bit of a longer one. So this class might go a little longer today, but maybe it'll make up for sort of the going a little shorter these past few days. Artrell, before we go, what's your question?
Can I share my screen real quick to make sure I did it right before you go on break?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. All right, so where am I? All right, so here's my terminal. Did that work? Or no?
I don't think it did, but if you click your terminal and hit the up arrow key, let's take a look at the command you just ran.
Oh,
If you hit down, you can go back to the previous. Yeah, so you see, you're making a GET request to careersencode.ml with no path. You just stick a /lockbox on the end of that.
ah,
You'll also notice that after your dash uppercase H header, you don't have a space. It turns out curl doesn't really care about that. You can actually smush them together like that, and it's fine, but just wanted to call it out that if you at least you want to do it as I wrote it out, you probably would put a space after it. But I bet if you hit enter there, that'll work for you.
okay.
Cool. But
And
Artrell, oh, go ahead.
And in Postman, it looked like it worked finally.
Looks like it worked for you. Yeah, you got back at 201, starts with a 2. That's a good sign.
All right.
Cool. One thing I do want to mention here, because Artrell ran into this, and I think Exona, you brought it up, I think yesterday. Let's make one more quick request. That's not one that we talked about. There's no slide for it, but I think it'll just be educational for you to see it. So I'm going to make a new tab here, and I'm going to make a GET request to careersincode.ml, and that's it. And I click send. And what I'm going to get back is a bunch of HTML. And this is sort of the reason why I'm going to get back a bunch of HTML is I've got a web page being hosted on careersincode.ml. And if I actually click preview here, it'll sort of show you a preview of what it's being shown. Well, I guess it's not going to give you a style sheet. That's kind of sucky. So, and just to sort of prove it to you, if I go over here on my web browser and I go to careersincode.ml, I get my web page here. So I think the thing I'm trying to show you is that the HTML I get back here and the HTML you're seeing when I go to the web page, they match. And that's very purposeful, and like that's how the web works. So just kind of cool to actually run through that exercise, I think. Cool. I think we're going to go on break, and let's maybe come back at like 7:25. I want to save myself a little bit of time here so that we can get through all the fetch stuff. So let's say 7:25, and see you then. Okay. So browser HTTP tools and libraries. So this is Fetch. So Fetch is built into a browser. It's a JavaScript thing. It's a function you can call in JavaScript. And it's sort of there's a lot of these sort of tools that allow you to make HTTP requests in JavaScript. Fetch, though, is the one that probably has the most market share these days. And part of the big reason why that is because it's built into web browsers. So a lot of these tools, you sort of have to include third-party code to be able to utilize them. Fetch, it's just built in. And that's quite convenient and quite handy. There's a few others you maybe should know about. The most classically known of these is called jQuery.ajax. You might have run across this thing called jQuery. I don't know if Max or anyone else has mentioned it to you, but it's sort of like an old school library of functions to make building websites easier. And it has a way you can make a request, an HTTP request from it that still gets a decent amount of use. We actually used to in this class teach with this library called Axios, which is an NPM package you can download and use. And one I've also used in the past with a lot of success has been Request Promise too. So just want to throw these out there just as terms in case you run across them, other sort of examples of this. But there's a lot of these packages. Like when I say a lot, I mean probably like hundreds or thousands of them, and like of varying levels of quality. But they all sort of have a lot of the same concepts, and I think Fetch will serve as a good foundation if you have to use any of those. Okay. Yeah, I just said all this, so let's move forward. Okay, so it's a global JavaScript function. What does that mean? Well, a couple other global JavaScript functions you might have used have been like console.log, or maybe like set timeout. Or let's see, what's some other stuff you might have run across? I think console.log is maybe the one that I know you've seen the most. Does set timeout ring a bell to anybody?
We haven't used that yet, but I'm familiar with what you're talking about. We've used like, like document stuff, like, that's like a, I mean, that's an object, but I get what we've used some JavaScript specific thing.
Like a document get element by ID. That's another example of a global JavaScript function. So what this function does is it takes some parameters when you call it, and those parameters sort of describe how you want to make the request. Things like the URL, things like the headers, things like the body, all this sort of stuff we've been talking about kind of ad nauseum today and yesterday. And what Fetch will do is it'll make that request and allow you in JavaScript to get back the response data. So you can do things like get the status code, get the response headers, get the body. What does that actually look like? So this is an example of a fetch call, and I'm sort of going to expand that out a little bit here. So sort of the most basic thing is it takes two parameters. The first one is the URL, just a string. The second parameter is optional, and it's an object, and you can pass in a bunch of information like custom things like, oh yeah, URL options. So you can pass in like a method. You can pass in like headers, like a body. So just to sort of walk through this, just to make sure you're understanding the syntax here, we got this fetch function we're calling. So this open parenthesis and this close parenthesis here, sort of for that fetch function. It takes two parameters. The first one's a string, and the second one is an object. And this first curly brace here and this curly brace right here sort of open and close that object. This object is a bunch of keys and values. So method's a key, get's a value, headers is a key, and then this inner object here is the value. This inner object here then has its own keys and values like authorization, super secret, that whole thing. And there's this key body and mapping the value testing 1, 2, 3. And if I were to run this, I'm going to run this in a second in my JavaScript console, then it'll make a request on my behalf to example.com, a GET request with this custom header and with this, I guess, GET request body. That doesn't really make sense in hindsight. This should be a post. Post. It's a post now. So it'll make a post request to example.com with this header, with this body, and then it will sort of give me back response data that I can then sort of do whatever I want with. Oh yeah, so this is sort of like how this breaks down into that raw HTTP format. This should be pretty reminiscent of something like curl. Like it's sort of a lot of these different pieces, sort of just a different format, you lay them out, and this just happens to be something that works in a web browser. And that's really where fetch has the advantage. Like Postman is great for debugging. Like you want to sort of try out a request. You want to sort of figure out exactly what you have to do. Postman's a great tool for that. Curl is also can be good for debugging, but the thing you're going to probably primarily use curl for is communication between other developers. That format is sort of a standard. Fetch, the primary thing you're going to use that for is actually making the request in your application. So like fetch, when your user goes to a page, like sort of you have this thing, this website deployed, it's in active use by users in production. Fetch is going to be what's making those requests. Not Postman, not curl, fetch. So that's why like fetch is probably the most important of all these at the end of the day. So the defaults object, or the second parameter, excuse me, that has some defaults for each of the different properties in there. As you saw here, I can actually specify an empty object, and that's totally fine. I can even omit this and just have one parameter, and it sort of will default to just it being empty. If I don't specify it, though, the method defaults to get, headers defaults to no headers, or like empty headers, empty object, and body defaults to an empty body. So this is actually kind of the same thing with curl, and this tends to be the way HTTP tools work, where they default to these things. And often, like, you don't really need custom headers. Often you don't really need a body if you're not making like a post request. So it's kind of handy that it works out like this. Okay. So you're probably thinking like, okay, this doesn't seem too hard. We can do this. No big deal. Like, this just seems like typing out a thing, copying and pasting some JavaScript. Cool. I mean, maybe you're having some tricky stuff with the syntax, and we can work through that. But this is really where this gets a little more complicated, and where I think I'm going to start to lose some more folks here. So when you make a request, you've probably noticed that it takes some time for that response to come back. It's not instant. That's different than something like console.log or something like document.getElementById. Those functions, when you call them, they return back data to you right away. And the reason why is they're what's called a synchronous function. So what that means is when that function runs, like you can think of it like a function that's sort of you've written in your code. You call that function, it does some stuff with data you provide, and it returns a value. And this is sort of like how you learned how functions work, and probably should not seem all that surprising. Like you're just like, of course, that's how functions work. But there's another thing you can do in JavaScript, and what's called an asynchronous function. Now, you remember how Max had you put that async keyword before functions? And you were doing some stuff with the async and await. This is sort of what was going on there. And we're not going to be using async and await for this. We're going to sort of do it the classical way, because I want to make sure you understand what's going on. And maybe near the end, we'll start to jump up to the async await stuff if it sort of works out well. But like, I think it's much more important we actually talk about how this stuff works before you sort of pull out the power tools. So what fetch does is the thing it returns, that function returns when you call it, is this thing called a promise. So think of a promise like a data type, like a number, or like an object, or like an array. It's sort of like a primitive data type. Well, guess let's go with that. I think if anyone's listening who knows what they're talking about, or like is an expert in this stuff who's watching this, they're going to be like, that's not quite a right statement, but whatever. Let's go with it for now. But like the way a promise works, you can think of it sort of like a box, like an empty box. So what happens is when your function, when fetch runs, it returns immediately. So you run your fetch, it kicks off the request, and it sort of returns. And there's a request sort of going on in the background. And what happens is, well, if the request hasn't finished yet, then what does fetch return, you might be asking? Well, it returns this promise thing. And you can think of a promise kind of like an empty box. That empty box, later on, fetch can put a value into it. So what happens is you have this box, and you get it back, and sort of you immediately, like, you call fetch, you get it back, you have this empty box. And you sort of have to like wait for a value to come into that box. And once a value's come into that box, you can then sort of look inside of that box and grab the value out. And that value contains your response information. And while you're sort of waiting for that value to show up in the box, that means the request is sort of going on. It's like in progress. How does that sound? You want to try this out? Or do you have some questions for me before we do that?
So a promise is originally empty, but then when we fetch or ask for a value, that value is put inside of the promise.
Yes. Think about it like this. Imagine you have okay, I'm gonna start typing out some code here. I'm gonna write a function. Wait a second, I need to turn on syntax highlighting. I will be honest, I don't use VS Code every day, so I'm probably gonna struggle a little bit with it, but hey, whatever, we'll figure it out. Okay, I'm gonna write a function. I'm gonna call it fake fetch. And fake fetch, I'm going to generate this thing. I'm going to go const promise is equal to an empty object. Actually, I'm going to go like value equals null. So I'm going to make an empty object here that has, or an object that has a key of value and maps to null. And I'm going to return this. Now, if I were to call fake fetch, what would I get out? I get back value null. Helps if I can type. Get back something like this, and that probably makes sense to most of you, I'd imagine. Imagine that there's a way that in this function, after it's returned, I can then modify promise. I can sort of like pretend for a second that like this function still runs after this return line executes. I do something like this, sort of like wait 3 seconds. And then something like promise dot value is equal to 1, 2, 3, something sort of like that. And yes, I understand this isn't really valid JavaScript. It wouldn't work like this. I'm just sort of saying, like, take the logical leap with me here. So what would happen is if I had like my promise P here, something like that, and I then did console.log P, I would get value null. But then if I were to like, let's say wait 4 seconds, a little longer than 3 seconds, and then I were to console.log p, I would get value 1, 2, 3. So the idea is the promise, sort of the fetch thing, fetch has like a reference to the promise. It's sort of holding on to this value. And it can modify this value after it's returned it, because sort of behind the scenes when it's returning, they sort of point to the same place. So that's sort of how fetch gets its data back to you. It updates the promise after you've gotten the original value. And then it adds that request or the response data in that it gets back from the server. I'm seeing some head shaking, but I'm also seeing some people who are expressionless. So how am I doing here? We're gonna give this a shot in a second, but I just want to like get a status check here before I type this out for real.
And I'll add something. One, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this might add a little context to it, because promises and fetches and stuff are still something I struggle to understand. But I think a good way to understand it is like when you have a web page, and like we've all used variables and stuff that like pulls from a server. So we're waiting on a certain number to make a calculation. Like without stuff like promises and fetches, like it might stop the whole page from loading, or it might stop the application from working at all because it's waiting on this piece of data. Whereas if you use a promise, it kind of tells the application to wait, keep going around this, but like wait for this value to come at some point. But it'll come at some point. Like don't, because it's not here, don't think that like nothing's working.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You think that would kind of explains it?
I think that's a great way to explain it. And I'll add one more piece of context there that I think is just going to further reinforce your perspective there, which is that the JavaScript is single threaded. And I don't know if you folks know what that means, but what that means sort of is like there's one sort of like execution context that's running through and sort of running your code. So it's like running one line, the next line, the next line. It's sort of like one little pointer that's running through your code. And because of that, it means if your web page sort of gets into like a loop and sort of blocks, and you could think like one way fetch could work is sort of it could like block, it sort of could wait for that to come back and sort of wait to return before the data comes back. And that's how a lot of programming languages will actually do this. And that's simpler in concept for maybe the programmer to understand. But because of the way the web browser works, there was only one thread. It means that if you did that, the entire web page would become unresponsive while you made your request. And you might think like, no big deal. I mean, it's probably just like loading or whatever. But like that means like the user couldn't like resize their browser window. Or that means like things like the operating system wouldn't be able to like handle like web events for the window. Like it would have a lot of downstream consequences. It wouldn't be so great. And I suspect if you run into like a web page like freezing before, this is like one reason why it could have happened. So in general, you don't want to block the main thread. You don't want to block the execution context. And something like a promise allows you to avoid doing that. Okay, let's actually write this here because I think that that's going to be helpful to probably cement it for some of you. Now, typically I do all this in like the JavaScript console on a web page, but I'm going to try this to go around to do it in some HTML files and script tags. I think it's going to be a little bit more familiar to you all. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a new file, and feel free to follow along with me here if you want. And I'm going to save it in this careers and code directory I have here. Okay. I'm just going to start typing out something that should look pretty familiar to all of you. So head and title, hello world. You're welcome to follow along, by the way, but I'm going to kind of go a little quick here. So, okay. Now my body, I'm going to go like hello world. I'm going to put a script tag here. Oops. Oh, come on, autocomplete. There we go. Okay. So in my script tag, I'm going to make a request to that get fruit endpoint we keep using. So fetch. So fetch is sort of a global function that's available. I'm going to make a request using fetch. So I'm going to, the first parameter is the URL, http://career in code.ml / fruit. And the second parameter, I can sort of give some other things if I want. I'll go method get, that is the default, but I'll just provide it here just to be safe. Okay. And then I'm going to store this into a variable called promise. Oh, I also should have mentioned, like, this is where JavaScript comes back into this, so you all better be ready. Okay, logging out promise. Cool. Okay, Max mentioned you use this Go Live extension before, I think, to run like a live server. I downloaded it earlier today. I'm gonna give it a shot. Never used it before, so maybe you all can tell me if I do it wrong. So I'm gonna click this, and it's gonna open this up, I think. Hopefully it'll work. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I'm in my JavaScript console here, and I'm looking at it, and we've got promise here. And there we go. So that's the promise we got back from our fetch request. So this contains the response from our fetch thing. And what you'll notice here is, if I go inside this promise, I can actually sort of like look at the value inside of that box. This like promise result thing is that. So you see here, there's like some parameters here. There's like status 200, status text okay. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Headers, here's like, well, I guess it's not gonna let me look at them, but there's sort of like response header data there. There's a body thing, which I guess I can't really inspect here. Well, I guess this wasn't as helpful as I thought, but like, this sort of is, this is the response that came back, but sort of in a different representation than you're used to seeing. Oops. Cool. Okay. Any questions before I move forward? Okay, I'm going to keep plugging forward then. So we've got our promise. What do we do next? So this is, okay, I guess this is really what I wrote. I guess I did careers and codes at it, whatever. Basically the same thing I wrote here. We need a way where like we can sort of run some code when that value shows up inside of the box that is our promise. Like we sort of like want to be like, when that value shows up, like do a thing. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of what we want to do. And then when that value shows up, like we know that our response came back and we can do whatever we want with that response. And this is sort of the power that a promise gives you over like that example I had with sort of the like the thing over here with fake fetch or whatever. And that's that there's this method on a promise called .then. And when you call .then, it takes a parameter. So .then is like a method that is, well, it's a function, a method, roughly the same sort of thing. You give .then one parameter, and that one parameter is itself a function. I'm assuming you folks have seen anonymous functions without names before that sort of are value only, right? Like this sort of syntax of like function without a name looks familiar, right? Hopefully.
We use it a little bit. I mean, we mostly use like named and like arrow functions, but
okay,
Max has used them before.
Let me flip this over to an arrow function then. They'll do the same thing, something like this. So in effect, what this is going to do is think about, let's go over to our fake fetch here and sort of build on that a little bit more. What if I were to add into this something like a, like sort of a list of functions? It's sort of like an array of functions that we can sort of later do things with. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on my promise, I'm going to give it a .then property. Actually, let's do it up here. It's going to make more sense. .then. And then I'm going to say, okay. So what .then will do is something like, oh wait, I want to go like So I'm going to pass a function in a dot then, and we'll say promise.push or promise.list of functions.
And not to interject, but I just want to
Yeah.
make it kind of clear for people who don't know. If I'm not wrong, this is an example of a method, right? Because it's a function that's part of an object, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been using that term interchangeably. I think some people might get confused with like when they're saying a method, it's literally a function that's in an object like that then is.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where it's a little bit pedantic. Like you'll sort of hear people use them a bit interchangeably, and they do technically have different meanings, but people will say like, oh, this object has a function, where technically like, oh, it has a method. That's the right sort of phrasing for it. But I'll probably use them interchangeably. But yeah, that's sort of the correct notation. So what I'm doing here, I've got this sort of dot then property I've assigned on this object here called promise. And when I call this, it sort of will put this function in a list of functions. So if I were to use this down here, do something like p dot then, I'm going to I'll just go like function, my function, something like that. And I'll go pass my function as a parameter, something kind of like that. So, and what this is going to do is it means if I at this point down here were to log this out, I'd get something like list of functions, my function. So you sort of see that now kind of in the list like that. Okay, cool. Now what will happen is sort of in our like fake fetch implementation, once the value, like the response came back, once the response comes back, what effectively will happen is something like promise.list of functions dot, actually, I'll do it this way. So looping over our list of functions, and then sort of I'll call each function with the promise value. Something kind of like that. Make this a little bigger. And I'm going to make this a little bigger too. So what that means is, if I had something like value here, and I were to log this out, what would happen is I could sort of wait 4 seconds, and what I would see is something like a log. It was like 1, 2, 3. And the reason why I would see that is, so let's sort of walk through this here. So I call fake fetch, it makes my new promise thing, and then oh, oops, I need to return promise. That might have been confusing for some folks. Sorry about that. I return my promise. Okay. So I've got this now here, and I log it out. Okay, value null, and I guess list of functions empty. And then what I'll do is I will call dot then and pass it in the function. And then that will sort of call the dot then here, which will then access list of functions, and will add my function into this thing here. And now list of functions, if I log out my promise again, will now have my function in it. Cool. Then I'll sort of wait some time, wait for the request to come back. And then once the request comes back, so it's like waited the time here and it's come back, then it'll update the value of the promise to be whatever sort of response object you have. And it'll call all the functions that have sort of been pre-registered with that dot then to sort of pass in that new value that came back as the response. So what'll happen is this function will get called later on, and it will get called where the value is 1, 2, 3. So then console.log here will run, and 1, 2, 3 will get logged out here. And then because you're sort of, I guess maybe technically it'd be like waiting 3 seconds and then waiting 1 second or something. So it would wait the time, would log that out, you wait another second, and then you could log out your promise, and now the value would be in there. So that's under the hood what's kind of going on. Any questions before I keep moving forward? We'll show you how this works with fetch, but just want to answer any conceptual things first. And it's totally cool if you're lost right now, because I suspect some of you probably are. Cool. Okay, let's try out the dot then with fetch here. So we're going to go back over to our web page that we were working on. So I'm going to go promise dot then, and I'm going to give it a function. In my function, I'm going to log something out. Okay. My function here is going to take one parameter, and it's going to be response. I'm going to log out response. Okay, I'm going to save that. Oh, wow, it looks like this thing live reloads. That's really fancy. Nice. And once I rerun this, you'll see, oh, now I got this response thing, and that's being logged out. So this should look pretty familiar to what we were seeing in the promise before when we were inspecting it. It's got that like, okay, the status text, the body, the URL, all these different parameters here. So we could now in here, like, let's say we wanted to log out the status code instead. We could go status. And now we get 200. Hey, that's pretty cool. So this is generally how you'll do web requests in a web browser. You'll make a request with fetch. You'll store the results into a promise. You'll then call .then on the promise to register a function to be called once the promise resolves, or that's what they call it when the value goes into the box, the promise resolving. Once the promise resolves, this function will be called with the value that's in the box, in this case, our response, and then we'll log out the whatever we want or do whatever we want with that value. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to paste this in to the Hack Upstate students channel here. Feel free to give this a shot locally on your end. Just take that, put that in a HTML document and open it up in your web browser. You should be able to see something similar to what I'm seeing. One call out is you're probably going to want to use the live server thing and not just double click the file. If you see up here in your URL, it says like file : / you might have some trouble making the fetch request. There's some rules we're going to be talking about next week about some special things around what web pages can request and what they can't. And those rules sort of act differently when you load things through the file protocol rather than HTTP. So you want to use that local dev server that you've been using. Cool. I'm going to extend this a bit more here, because wouldn't it be cool to actually sort of go full circle with this? What if we could show this information in the HTML somehow? Like, because that's kind of like what the whole game is here. Like, you get stuff from a server, you then get that, you sort of wait for that to come back, and then you render it on the page. And then the user can see it, and then they do another thing, and that causes another request, and that you get another response, and you render another thing on the page, and you do that like 50 times in a row, and now you have an application doing some sort of crazy workflow or something. So let's do that. Okay, so if I'm going to do that, I'm going to make myself a div. I'm going to give it an ID of status, something kind of like that. And then I'm pretty sure you're really familiar with this, but let me know if you're not. I'm going to do something like const div is equal to document dot get element by ID status div.inner HTML is equal to span, something maybe like response.status. Okay, I'm going to save that, and if you look in the background here, got ourselves 200. So this sort of workflow is kind of what you'd be doing. Before I go further, though, any questions? Okay. It's sort of hard to figure out if nothing is, I totally get this, or I'm really lost right now.
I imagine this is more clear than your under the hood example. That was pretty intense.
Fair enough. Okay. You're probably wondering though, okay, status, like that's not all that cool. Like you probably want to see what's in the body of the thing. Like that's where what's kind of important. So this is where promises can get a little more intense because, oh yeah, I was talking about, yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah. Oh yeah, I should bring this up before I move on. You have to put the console.log here inside of the .then. You see how this is inside of the function? If I take, let me comment that out for a second, but if I take this and I move this down here, that's not going to work. It has to be inside of the function. And the reason why it has to be inside of the function is because this needs to run when that promise resolves, when the value goes into the box. If I have it down here, what it's going to do is this is going to run after I register the promise, but not before like it gets populated. So you need to make sure that if you're going to do things with fetch when the response comes back, this needs to be inside of the .then, inside of the function that you pass in a .then. And that's really, really important. In fact, if you have this down here, you're going to get an error, something along the line of like response isn't defined. And the reason you're going to get that is because this response variable is defined up here, and you're trying to use it down here. And it's not, this is like an inner lexical scope, if you know what that means. Like it's like a function inside that sort of defines the variable inside of that function. And you can't use that variable outside of the function. It doesn't exist. So you'll get an error. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So I just wanted to clarify. I was going to ask this earlier. So response is technically, we can make that word whatever we want, because you said it's a variable.
It's a variable.
So we're just using response in this case because it's the most, it makes the most sense based on what you're expecting from it. But you could technically make that anything, right? Okay.
If I do that, it'll do the same thing. Well, it won't print out to the screen anymore because I commented that out, but you still get back 200.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yep. Cool. Okay. We're not done. So we need to be able to get the body out of this somehow. And you notice that in the thing we were looking at in the JavaScript console, there wasn't we didn't see like body text in there. And the reason why is this isn't just one promise. What I mean by that is inside of this promise, there's another promise. It's like a box inside of a box. So think about it like this. Think about you have a box, and then when the response comes back, you put inside of that box two things. You put like a piece of fruit. We're going with the fruit theme. You put a banana in there, and you put another box. And then eventually later on in that other box, you'll put an apple. So what you need to do is you can get the banana out. That's sort of response what we've done here. But you need, if you want to get the body, you have to sort of unwrap that inner box inside of your first box to get the body or the apple. So what you'll find is that a thing you're going to do pretty often is something kind of like this. If you want to get the response body, there's actually a second promise you've got to use. So the first promise is an asynchronous operation to make a request to the server. The second promise is an asynchronous operation to decode the response to get the body out of it, because that takes some time, it turns out, and is not super fast and synchronous like a lot of other things in JavaScript. So let's write this out here. Okay.
Real quick, Ryan, I just want to point out again, I'm sorry to keep interrupting. There might be some people in the class who don't recognize the var because we use let.
Yes.
When we're so just in case anybody's confused by that, it's basically let.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Good call out. Okay. Let's get the contents of this response here. So you saw here there was this method on the response object called text. So response dot text.
You got to change the variable back to
Oh, I
response
do.
to still help.
Thank you. Okay. So promise to we'll go with here. Okay. Now, if I log out promise to, I'm going to see promise. Now, you'll see if I open up this promise result should look a lot like our response. So when I say like this takes time, like in the sense of a computer, like milliseconds are a long time. Like for a computer, like nanoseconds or microseconds are instant. So this might take like nearly an instant amount of time, but it still takes long enough where if the response was like really large, it could take like 100 milliseconds to decode or something, which for a computer is like an eternity. So, okay, let's, we logged that out. We saw sort of that promise inside the promise, the box inside the box. Let's use our dot then again. Promise to dot then. And this time we've got a body. Let me get out of this. And again, you can call body whatever you want, but body kind of makes the most sense. I'm going to go console.log body. So I'm just going to log out that body. There we go. Apples, oranges, bananas. That's what we got before, right? Cool. I'm going to take this up here now. This thing we were doing before, we were putting the data into that status div. I'm going to move this down here. And I'm going to update this instead of response.status. I'm going to go body. So what this will do, you can probably guess if you're following along here, but I'll print out my body right into the web page. So you can sort of see what could happen here. Like, let's say you had a text box. Actually, let's do this here. Or a button. I have a button, and it could be like make request. And then I can add like, I think if you don't know what this does, let me know and I'll change course here. But I could do like on click and I could be like make request. And I could put all this in the function. Oh, freaking. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I just put the whole thing we wrote into a function. So we now have sent out this make request function. It's in our script tag. I've now got a button here. If I click this button, now it'll make that request and it'll add the thing into the body. So taking this one step further, imagine you had like a text box next to this, and it was something like you could type in some data and click make request, and you include that data in the request you make. Now you've got a little form going on where like you're sending data to a server, the server is doing something with that data, and it's giving you back a response, and you're showing that to the user. You've got a whole little workflow there, a little mini like cycle. And this sort of thing is a big, like a composable building block of a lot of web applications. And sort of as you go forward with your capstone, you'll see sort of how this is a key piece to providing workflows to users do things with a server. So pretty much the goal of this module, these 2 weeks, is to get you to a point where you can build this sort of workflow on your own. And we're going to have a project at the end of these 2 weeks to sort of walk you through that and give you an opportunity to do something. But yeah, sort of now I think you're starting to get a bit more of like line of sight of like what the end of this is going to be. Cool. So that's about where I wanted to leave it for now. Next week, we'll go through this stuff again because I have a feeling that some folks are probably a little bit lost, and if you are, that's totally cool. But I want to show this all to you, let it marinate over the weekend. You can think about it a little bit more, maybe give it a try on your own. And then on Monday, we'll sort of come back and we'll give this a shot in with some structured exercises and sort of some more practice.
Sure. I just have a quick question. Do you mind just posting the entire HTML that you just said, the new version, just so that we can kind of play along with it? And I also, if it's okay with you, I'd love to talk to you about my capstone whenever you have free time, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah,
Get some ideas about APIs and all of this.
Definitely. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Cool. Before we get going here, there's one last thing I wanted to mention. And Max had mentioned that he was trying to give you folks like an assignment every weekend to sort of work on. So I put something together. I'm not going to have it, I don't think, well, I think I might have accidentally sent it to Mel this morning. So let me see if I can pull it up here. This might have been what it was. It's going to let me log in. Yeah, here we go. So this assignment should be available on Canvas for you to work on. Like, this is not super high priority. My goal really is just when you get a chance, do this, and it'll give me sort of an opportunity to see where everybody's at. This is a request. I'd like you to make it with at least Postman and preferably cURL. If you want to do Netcat too, like sort of make this request with any sort of tools you're comfortable with. I think I had mentioned Postman and cURL in here, and that's probably a good baseline, but this is sort of a new endpoint. It largely matches what we've done in class, so I think it should be pretty straightforward and easy to follow along with. But give it a shot, and I'll take a look at it next week instead of follow up with folks. Cool.
Do we have to post answers, or we're just gonna go over next week?
If you can, just like take a screenshot of your terminal or Postman, just so that I can see.
Okay.
Cool. Any other questions before we get going here? Okay. Well, as a reminder, we got Open Hack tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to seeing as many of you as I can there. That'll be fun, and maybe we can chat more about this stuff, and or maybe about other things too. But otherwise, then see you tomorrow. Bye, folks.
See you. Have a good night.
Bye,
Bye,
guys.
you too.